Welcome everyone to the nation's pre-election webinar, where we are going to both address and perhaps amplify the American jitters, as Edmund Wilson once called them. I think it was Edmund Wilson.
That's right.
Anyway, we have a fantastic panel this morning, so I'm going to introduce even those who need no introduction, like Katrina vanden, the nation's editorial director and publisher. She served as editor of the magazine from 1995 to 2019. So it's her very fashionable and elegant shoes that I'm attempting to fill this morning. And she's a frequent commentator on US and international politics for ABC, MSNBC, CNN, and PBS, and writes a weekly column for the Washington Post. Jeet here. Jeet, hold up your hand. For those who didn't know that you actually existed and have only encountered you on our website or our pages, is National Affairs Correspondent at The Nation and author of In Love with Art, Francoise Mouly's Adventures in Comics with Art Spiegelman, and also Sweet Lechery, Reviews, Essays, and Profiles. Joan Walsh, sorry, Joan, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Who many of you will know, is also National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation and a CNN political contributor. Salon's first news editor, Joan served as editor-in-chief for 6 years. She's written for publications ranging from Vogue to The Nation. I'm not sure that's such a gamut, Vogue to The Nation. We're talking about high fashion here. And for newspapers including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Elie Mystalwill. Elie, would you like to wave to your fan base? There you go. Is the nation's justice correspondent, covering the courts, the criminal justice system, and politics, and the force behind the magazine's monthly column, Objection. He's also Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Type Media Center. Mystalwill is a graduate of Harvard College and the Harvard Law School, so he knows what he's talking about here, folks. A former associate at Debevoise and Plimpton, and a lifelong New York Mets fans. Well, they say into each life a certain amount of tragedy must fall. Prior to joining The Nation, Mystalwill was the executive editor of Above the Law. He's a frequent guest on MSNBC and a wide range of broadcast outlets. And then last but by no means least, our beloved John Nichols, who's written about politics for The Nation for close to 2 decades and is also a national affairs correspondent. His work has been circulated internationally, quoted in countless books and articles, and cited in numerous debates on the floor of Congress. John is also the author of numerous books, including The Genius of Impeachment, a critically acclaimed analysis of the Florida recount fight of 2000, Jews for Buchanan.
Okay.
The S word. I think the S in the S word is socialism. Is that right, John? Okay. And a best-selling biography of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Dick, the man who is president. John's latest book couldn't be more timely. A look at the enduring legacy of Henry Wallace's anti-fascist, anti-racist politics and how they relate to today's fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. So that is our distinguished panel. Welcome, panelists. And I'm going to, and welcome again to our audience, our viewers and guests. I'm going to begin by asking people, we're all the worried well here. So what is it that you are worried about most? And let's start with John and then go in reverse order.
Well, I wish I was at the end, because then I could just, pick the one worry that hadn't been mentioned by everybody else. There are so many worries. I have a story up now with Joan, which we wrote together, about Supreme Court interventions, and particularly Brett Kavanaugh's bizarre concurrence in a case involving counting absentee ballots in Wisconsin, where he literally went back into history and plucked a concurrence from William Rehnquist, which was not accepted by the whole court because it was too radical in the 2000 Bush v. Gore case. And so my worry, quite frankly, is that we have a revisiting of Bush v. Gore now with 3 veterans of that fight on the Republican side, John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, all people who were lawyers for the Bush side of Bush v. Gore, sitting on the United States Supreme Court, as it looks at cases regarding this election. So I'm not going to talk anymore about that because I think we have a legal expert who will say something more important. My biggest worry is that there's so much focus in our media on the presidential race, on the top of the ticket and the energy related to it, that there will be a drop off in votes from the presidential race to the down ballot races. It's my view that in a number of states, Joe Biden is going to bring out a surprising number of new voters, a striking number. The early voting suggests that. And the key question is, will they vote down the whole ballot? If they do, and remember, many states don't allow straight ticket voting. If they do vote down the whole ballot, I think you have the potential for some really significant results. But if there's any kind of drop off, you have a danger in a number of Senate races. And to my mind, the big intangible at this point, the big uncertainty, is where those Senate races will go. So I'm going to be watching on election night for the evidence of that whole ticket voting, because I really do view it as what could be transformational in this election.
Okay, so John, it sounds like you're worried that it will end up in the Supreme Court. And of course, Elie, you've been warning us about the changes to the courts since you joined the nation and even before. Is that your biggest worry?
Absolutely, Don. I mean, if it's close, they're going to steal it. If it's close, they're going to steal it outright. I think it's important for people to think about Bush v. Gore in this way. The key issue in Bush v. Gore was whether or not Florida was going to be allowed to continue its recount. It had started recounting the votes. It hadn't finished recounting the votes. Republicans tried to stop it. They tried to stop it at the state Supreme Court level. They appealed. They tried to stop it. That was the whole point. Stop the recount. And the Republicans won. In 2020, the issue is going to be whether or not states can finish their count. Not a recount. It's whether they're going to be allowed to finish counting the initial round of ballots that they already have in-house. And Brett Kavanaugh's wackadoodle decision, wackadoodle concurrence the other day, is how the Republicans intend to stop states from counting the votes. And it's as simple as that. Republicans do not want the states to be allowed to count all of the ballots that they have. If it is close, if we need that extra 1 or 2% of ballots to be counted in order to defeat a presidential candidate or a senatorial candidate, Republicans will steal that outright with crazy wackadoodle decisions like we saw from Brett Kavanaugh. So that's, and so the weird thing is that I'm looking on election day to see if we are winning by enough of a margin that it doesn't make sense for Republicans to stop the count because they're already behind, right? But if they are ahead, if they are ahead in certain places at 12 p.m. on election night, then 12 a.m. the day after the election, you know, they will do everything they can to stop the counting of additional ballots to shift the election towards the Republicans. And absent, mass protests, I don't see a great way to stop them.
Well, we'll get to what we can do about it later. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of time to talk about that, and I'm sure our audience want to hear your thoughts about that. But thank you, Joan.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, I have to follow my two colleagues and echo those worries. I think that the Kavanaugh concurrence was so shocking because he really framed it as we can't allow these votes that come in, or they not even come in, they get counted after election night to flip. He used the term flip the election. Which is so ignorant, as though, any votes are certified at that point, as though the election is settled. And Elena Kagan dissented at him very sharply, but it just showed a kind of Fox News mentality on the Supreme Court. And it's also really worrisome, beyond worrisome, that how do we have these three people who worked on Bush v. Gore, plus Clarence Thomas, who decided on, it just is pointing us to how awful that was, what happened, what we allowed to happen. in 2000, and that we're still living with the consequences, and that their project, has been to suppress the votes. But now the Democrats seem to be doing a really good job in getting votes out. And in a pandemic, using the mail as well as early voting. Now we're not going to count those votes. Okay, you got them out, but we're going to figure out a way for their votes not to matter. And as somebody who stood in line for 2.5 hours in New York City the other day, I continue to just think it's outrageous how even in blue states, our votes are suppressed, and that we're going to see a lot of long lines around the country, despite this amazing and I think inspiring outpouring of early voting. Half of the number of people who voted in 2016 have already voted. It's beyond that. Every time I look at the TV, it's just growing. But we still don't make it easy. And so for people to have jumped through those hoops, but now maybe their votes won't count is really what I worry about.
So you worry about the count being stopped prematurely, which is also what Elie said.
Yeah.
And about it ending up in the court. And Jeet, I guess, I'm wondering whether, you can say me too, you're allowed to have the same worry as everybody else, but here's a question I have for you in case you have the same worry as everybody else. I don't want to step on your answer, so if you have a different answer, give it. But I wonder whether all those people lining up to vote, most of whom I'm assuming because it's early voting, the Democrats have pushed for early voting, are Democrats. Do we have the party? Do we have the party we deserve? Do we have the party with a backbone to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, which we clearly didn't in 2000? So, in case all you were going to say is I agree with Joan and Elie, which I doubt.
Actually, I do think that there's more indication that Biden and his people are going to be willing to fight than Gore was in 2000. I think that the Democrats are more lawyered up, and they're more prepared, and they're more ready to think. I think, was there a famous phone call in 2000? John would know this, where one of Gore's people said, it's like Guatemala down here. And I think which came as a shock to Gore, but I think would not be a shock to Biden. And I think, I think beyond the Democratic Party, the broader, left electorate is much more prepared. But let's try to maybe game this out in terms of our worries. I think for me, specifically, the worry is Pennsylvania. That's going to be the tipping point state. Biden could win the, Wisconsin and Michigan, but if he loses Pennsylvania and Florida, and it could be murky enough there. It's not just he needs an outright win, right? I think, if they do these sort of legal shenanigans, and there's sort of last minute votes that aren't counted because they came in the mail, then it's a real problem. I think the core problem is the Electoral College. I think it's still possible that you could get Biden winning by 7-8% nationally and losing in the Electoral College. This is something pollsters like Nate Silver have pointed out. And I don't think we can, especially if there's not really a legitimate count. So that's the worry.
So let's talk about legitimacy for a second, Katrina. I do want to know what your main worry is, and I don't want to preempt your answer about that. But I'm also, as someone who's been in this for as long as I have, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on where if it looks like there's a huge popular vote margin for Biden and the Republicans have rigged an Electoral College victory by stopping the count in a state like Pennsylvania or Florida. What does that do to, and where does that leave us on? We've never been fans of the Electoral College, but do we just have to supinely accept those results?
I think it's hard to change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. I think we need to fight to abolish the Electoral College moving forward. I think what's hopeful and not hopeful is that millions of people have seen the crisis of our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
That they've seen, the crisis of democracy triggered by the rights, quest for judicial dominance, quest for capture of the institutions, we have a minoritarian government protected by these majoritarian so-called institutions. And I think part of the work we do going forward, assuming whoever it is, but even if it's Biden, you got to change the filibuster. If you have a Senate, we hope to, you're not going to have enough senators, and give them 3 weeks. Don't sit back like Obama did for 2 years. And you want to abolish the Electoral College.
You mean a short honeymoon?
Short honeymoon.
No
I mean,
No honeymoon, sorry.
no honeymoon. I mean, you need 3 weeks but give them 3.
Right.
But those institutions have just been captured now by the right, and they were horrific institutions from the get-go. So we need to look, and I think people have refound their kind of, their memory muscle in this, in waiting in lines and seeing the failure of a system, which is being monitored by the OSCE or the UN, which was a fantasy in 2000 when Christopher Hitchens suggested the UN monitor our elections. But I do worry in very concrete ways. The capture of the court, it's easy to talk about this end game, but it is in the immediate moment, the Kavanaugh decision, but it's also in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, you have murky legal situations in terms of counting. Florida drives us crazy Florida, if Biden wins Florida early, I think that's it. I may be wrong, but he'd have to piece together Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin pretty quickly, because there is the danger of stopping the count. I talked to Reverend Jackson yesterday. He still has the trauma of how they not only shut down the vote, the Supreme Court, but the Democratic establishment shut down the protests.
Right.
Labor unions were demobilized. Reverend Jackson was protesting. Someone once said to me, when they saw Warren Christopher, former Secretary of State, show up in Dade County, and then James Baker, they knew it was all over. You're talking a guy who could run Guatemala dictatorships, James Baker. So, I do worry, but
who did.
But I take sustenance that I do think if it's a blue wave, it's exciting, but you got to change these structural rules. And I take sustenance from something we were talking about before we all joined you. What is the October surprise? It's COVID. It's the court maybe, but we haven't had FBI Director James Comey come out October 28th, today, 4 years ago, and do what he did, which I think, played a key role in that outcome. So,
but it's interesting to me, and I'm gonna recede in a moment and let our panelists talk more among themselves. It's interesting to me, Katrina, that there are still 2 days left in October, and you didn't mention Taiwan and China. You didn't mention Korea. You didn't mention Iran.
On China, we can get there, but how to avert a new Cold War if it's President Biden? But China the other day sanctioned 4 American companies. Mm-hmm. It's not sitting back. So I'm just saying it is possible. I don't see that. I don't see that.
One less thing to worry about. Always good. All right. So as I said, I'm gonna recede a little bit. But I'm wondering, and whoever wants this, just to start us off, when do you think, if the idea in 2000 is that one of the progressive mistakes was to send everybody home, when do we want people to be out this time?
Let me take a grab on that and say, people need to be out on election day itself. And this is, there needs to be a lot of election protection in battleground states. Unions are stepping up to do this, and others. It's just important to make sure that people who want to go vote and do decide to go vote in person can do so easily and without obstruction and without intimidation. We have had some terrible things happen in the last week as regards this. In Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, who is the very good Secretary of State there, essentially issued an order saying that people shouldn't be openly carrying weapons around polling places. And that was upended by a judge's ruling. And so in Michigan, they've been told, yeah, you can show up there with guns. What's really important is that progressive forces be there to make sure that voting is safe and easy and supported.
I'm sorry, I think has John just frozen for me? Has he frozen for everybody?
He's frozen, yeah.
He's
What's
back.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
back.
You
I'm sorry.
froze.
But
Very unlike you.
not just calling in the police, but having people out there in vests, as they will have in Wisconsin, directing traffic, getting people in. So election day itself is important. There will be rallies the next day around the country, November 4th rallies.
Protect the vote rallies.
Protect the vote rallies. Those are very important. And one of the things that I would just emphasize very quickly is that don't just obsess about the presidential election. You may live in a state that has, clearly gone for Biden or for Trump and has been called as such. I think the real battle post-election day will be for Senate seats. And when I look down that list of competitive Senate seats, I can see 4 or 5 that could come down to a handful of votes, that could be in a recount contested situation. And the one thing to remember is that if Joe Biden becomes president of the United States with Mitch McConnell in charge of the Senate, Joe Biden will begin his presidency as a lame duck.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental reality. So when people think about getting active, when they think about monitoring and being engaged with making sure the count works, they really have to focus in on what I suspect will be a number of battles over just a close count on a Senate seat in places like Montana, potentially South Carolina, Georgia, where you could have the question whether to have a runoff or not in some circumstances and who will be in it. So all sorts of issues are out there. And so I just plead with people, look beyond the presidential to that down ballot.
Well, and I would go farther down ballot. As you know, I've written a lot about the races for state legislative seats. And I think, there are some really encouraging developments in states that are going to have, some control of redistricting. And so you look at North Carolina, which, they're within a few seats of taking back the state Senate. Even Texas is possible, Michigan. So, and then there are some state legislatures that aren't necessarily involved in redistricting, but they could flip as well. But, I think that needs to be another message that I'm not hearing as much. I talked to, there are a lot of good groups working on specifically on state legislative races now, and that wasn't true 4 years ago. But, one of their leaders said, there's a sizable drop off even between, not just between president and Senate, but between Senate or governor and then those state ledge races. And so, they're trying to educate people to vote the whole ticket, all of that. But, there are some really exciting opportunities there. That's also where we're seeing so much activism. So in terms of getting people out in the streets and having a really engaged electorate, we have that this time. And so that makes me optimistic, but I'm still not sure that people are paying enough attention to those races.
Could I just pick up on what Joan says, because her reporting on state legislative houses races has been so central to, I think, a better understanding it. President Obama didn't pay attention to those races, so we're catching up in that area. But it's not just a mobilized electorate. I think we also worry, let's assume Senator Biden becomes president and he has enough senators that we can then fight for a filibuster. But you have now a progressive democratic infrastructure. I hate that word, it's so unsexy, but it's a different sort of ecosphere of these groups, which are not all powerful, but they are ascendant and they are giving the establishment competition. I think that decision of the DNC not to allow vendors to work for primary candidates provoked a terrible backlash. But the groups. I mean, People's Action, Working Families, Black Lives Matter Electoral Project.
Sunrise, Justice Democrats.
Sunrise, Justice Democrats. I mean, these are groups that didn't really exist with strength and constituencies in 2008. So I think that that's something hopeful to look at moving forward. And that goes all the way, as you know, Joan, down ballot. And then you have groups like Amanda Littman's group you've profiled. I mean, and it's a younger, more diverse because they can run. I mean, we haven't talked about the money in this race. And what Bernie was able to do, not many can, but there's a lot of money sloshing around. Right. And the down ballot races are, as you know, not as expensive, but more inclusive. So I think that's hopeful. And I think that's something to build on in this next time. Biden may not be the greatest friend, but we know that. We go vote as a first step, not the end game. So right.
I think towards the specific question of when do people go home, like not till the voting is done, right? I vote. Joan talked about standing 2.5 hours in line in New York City. I up here in Westchester, I stood in line for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I timed it. It's the first time I've early voted ever in my life, and the amount of misinformation in the line was so strong, right? And it was pushing people off the line, right? It was like people who didn't understand some of the rules, like, oh, well, there's no way my polling place closed at 8. Well, there's no way I'm going to get in by 8, so I should just go home. No. If you get in the line, they have to, like, just the amount, not a lot of people know all of the rules and the ins and the outs of just how you are able to vote, how you are going to be allowed to vote. That happens especially on election day. There's a lot of misinformation, and that's from people who are trying their best. In this situation, you're also going to have Republican forces out there kind of actively trying their worst, right? Like actively spreading misinformation and trying to discourage people from voting. So especially if you live in a battleground state, if you have the opportunity and the health situation, because that's, I mean, we haven't really talked about it, but that's a huge part of what's happening right now. If you're kind of strong and healthy and have a mask with the shield and whatever, and live in a battleground state, just like being a force in the line, around the lines, to tell people what their rights are, to encourage people, to keep people's spirits up. At my line, there was a woman who brought pizza. Like these are actually like useful things that you can do in your own community. Right? Because we have so many people who wonder, like, well, what can I voted, now what can I do? Like, if you can go to your voter suppressed station and just keep people's spirits up and just tell people the truth, even that can, you never know how many voters might stay in the line, might join the line, just with your kind of good spirits. So that's a kind of concrete thing that people can do, but it also answers Don's question, like, when do we go home? Never. We don't go home until the last person has voted at the last polling station.
Well, wait, do we go home then, or do we go home after the last vote has been counted?
Actually, the key is that the key where I think some of the biggest interventions and biggest problems may be is around the count. And so I would argue that, maybe you have to stagger it out a little bit. You might have to sleep at some point, but making sure that counts are not interrupted or intimidated is a very, very important part of this process in battleground states.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked a lot about the courts, but there's a two-sided thing. There's the courts from above, and then there's the sort of militias and Proud Boys from below. And like Trump is sort of counting on both of them, and is like, I don't think we should be naive. We're already seeing some of that, and that's I think that's, for me, like one of the big reasons to try to get people out there and staying out there protesting and monitoring, as John suggested, just because we are going to see these very energized right-wing groups that Trump has stirred up in action.
I worry a little about that, and I wonder what people's thoughts are. I mean, I know I was talking to the people at Berks Stand Up in Berks County, Pennsylvania, giving a shout out to Reading and that area, which went for Obama twice and then went for Trump last time, and which they're hoping to flip back this time. And a lot of the training they're doing for election day stuff is de-escalation, because Pennsylvania is an open carry state. And if the polling place is a school or a church, for example, that already has a no guns on the premises rule, then you're not allowed to show up with guns. But if it's not, if it's in a shopping mall or a park or any building where people would normally be allowed to carry, then just like in Michigan, people will be allowed to carry on election days. And, you know, I just wonder, what do we do about the fact that they have guns and we have goodwill?
You use your goodwill. Come on. It's just the reality of it. Look, the bottom line is this: de-escalation is the most important training in this regard. The danger at a polling place is not necessarily that somebody is there pulling people out of line or literally walking up to them and threatening them, although that could occur. And we've had some incidents in Virginia and other places already. The real danger is just chaos and a sense of instability around a place where people are being asked to, you know, walk up or drive up, get out, get in a line and wait for a substantial amount of time. If it's really unstable, if it looks chaotic, if there's people pushing each other, if there's people arguing, you're going to lose a portion of your potential voters. So the de-escalation training is heart and center of this. Again, a number of labor unions around the country are actually engaged in that specific work. There's also activist groups that are involved in it. I don't want to paint a picture that election day is going to be chaotic. I think there's a reasonable chance that a lot of this has been, you know, sort of a fake, an effort to scare people in advance and create an uncertainty. I understand that possibility, but if indeed there is a potential of a chaotic situation, that's the biggest danger. So I would emphasize the importance of de-escalation. I would also emphasize the reality that in many of the battleground states, we are going to be at a peak COVID-19 moment. Again, I'm going to emphasize a peak COVID-19 moment. That will be true in Wisconsin. That will be true in Iowa. It will undoubtedly be true in a number of other states. This is a huge deal. You have to make sure that the circumstance around the polling place is not just, you know, stable and there aren't threats, but also that you have a health and safety protocol in place that people feel comfortable voting. And that involves, frankly, progressives policing their local elected officials and making sure that everything is done right on election day so it's a safe and stable place to vote.
So one key part of that is knowing who your local electeds are and making sure you reach out to them or are able to reach out to them. I mean, let's remember that Jim Crow wasn't the law. It was first done through intimidation.
Right.
Practice.
Which is again why I think that information is so key. Information is king, right? Because what intimidates people often in the first instance is just not knowing what to do. Like, and that feeling of not knowing what to do is what intimidates people and is what, so, you know, so you walk in and there's some guy with a gun who says, well, you can't do that here. Well, if you don't know that he's wrong, you're going to be, you're much more likely to be intimidated, right? If there's not somebody kind of next to you who's like, no, that's just an idiot. You can go here, man. Like you're less likely to vote, right? And again, the point, and I think John said it exactly right. It's not about literally kind of, you know, holding a literal gun to your head and trying to change your vote. That's not what they are trying to do. Luckily, it's not what they legally can do. It's just trying to create a sense and a fear and a chaotic feeling that you don't really know what to do and maybe this isn't worth it for you, right? Like that's what they're trying to accomplish. And so to the extent that you have the ability and the opportunity to combat that misinformation with real information, that is actually extremely helpful. You know, even so, you know, I'm voting and my wife is voting and trying to figure out the working families thing, if we're gonna, like, you know, because, you know, that's how I roll. And I'm trying to explain to my wife, oh no, this is how you do it. And then some random is just like, you know, you can't tell her that. And I'm like, yes, I can. Like, I don't know who you are, but I can. And then I just, you know, with my voice, it's like, in case anybody needs any information, I'm here to help, right? Because like that's what you do. And if you can do that, you are actually helping people feel confident that they know what to do. And if they feel like they know what to do, ain't no gun gonna stop it.
Right. So it's empowering. Information is empowering. And Jeet, what information do you think people need to have aside from that they have, you know, the right to be there and to stay there?
Well, that they should know that they can stay in line, right? That like if you're in line, I guess it would probably vary from place to place, but you know, like you should stay in line as long as you're in line and as long as you can vote. I think that's especially like, I mean, that's the major way of voter suppression in America, to have these long lines and for people to give up. So I think if you are in line, I think that's a message that you give to everyone. Like, you don't leave the line. I think that's the one message I would give to people. Don't leave the line.
Don't leave them.
I know, do we think that the various state parties are doing what they need to do to keep people in lines? I mean, are they organized to give out water, energy bars, stuff like that? I mean, are you seeing
Lawn
signs of that, Joan?
chairs.
Yeah. If I could say something somewhat blunt about this, in 2016, the Clinton campaign, unfortunately, did not have a lot of respect for state parties.
Yeah.
And as a result, many of the state parties were treated almost as spectators to the process. It's very, very different this time. It's not just because of Biden. In fact, it's not really about Biden. It's about a recognition that that didn't work last time. And so the last few days, I've been talking to party chairs and other people around the country. And what I'm struck by is that there's two things that are different. Number one, they are very well financed. They have a substantially larger amount of money than they had in 2016. Number two, they're very conscious of all of these structural challenges. To give you a quick example, in Wisconsin, where the Supreme Court ruling came down on Monday, that ruling affected something like 360,000 voters who have absentee ballots that have not been returned. In the past, I think that would have been a crisis, people pulling their hair out saying, what are we going to do? That didn't happen in Wisconsin. Ben Wickler, the chairman of the Wisconsin party, immediately announced that the party would be moving resources to the largest scavenger hunt in Wisconsin history. They were going to find 360,000 ballots and make sure that they were cast in the proper way. And in fact, they are deep into that already. It's not to diminish the significance of the court ruling, but it is to suggest that a lot of these parties, in places where they were once actually quite weak, have been strengthened. I'm seeing that in one final place in Nebraska, where Jane Kleeb has done remarkable work with the Democratic Party, and where, frankly, they are going to win an electoral vote out of Nebraska from the Omaha.
Is that Kara Eastman?
And
Yeah.
elect a progressive member of Congress from Omaha. And that, I put a lot of that down to a real structural change in the parties.
I would
It's also
say,
because Trump is out there giving people hypothermia.
Yeah.
Right.
His own, right.
and killing his own voters.
Right.
North Carolina is another place. I mean, I would say one thing, John, about the Clinton disconnect with the state parties. It was definitely there, but it was also that, for lots of complicated reasons, the state parties have really atrophied over the years. And you saw that in Wisconsin before Ben. And we know really wonderful people who are trying to fight to change it. But there's new young leadership in North Carolina. So, it's both a recognition. And again, we don't think it's Biden, but it's a recognition since 2016 that these institutions can have power, can have more power if they're adequately and competently staffed. So I think we see that in some battleground states, and that's another encouraging sign.
But I think it's also a measure of a more strategic, intentional, progressive community. That, for example, Ben Wickler, he came out of Move On, right?
Right.
I mean, and Jane in Nebraska.
Came out of the Bernie campaign.
Right. And so the understanding of the importance of taking over pivots of power, or giving, the state parties can be sites of power to build out.
And also the county parties. I mean,
Absolutely.
what we've seen, a lot of the great writing about the resistance, Laura Putnam and Dana Fisher, they're finding that, these indivisible groups, for example, or just, the local groups that sprang up in desperation after, and went to the Women's March, came home and said, we've got to do something. A lot of them have taken over these moribund structures of the party. And, they're making sure that their candidates, all the way down ballot, county commissioner, they're treating this as like a job, but an avocation, and something that you don't just do every 4 years.
Absolutely. And I've never liked drawing the parallel to the right, but it is, the right took over the PTAs, the right to,
No, one of the things that struck me in talking to people in the last few weeks is the extent to which the Bernie people have been folded themselves in, or in Nebraska, in the case of Jane Klebb, actually taken over state parties.
Right.
But even in other states, even in Pennsylvania, where there was a big Bernie infrastructure, those people are now running local organizations. And they said, look, Biden wasn't our first choice, but this is an existential crisis and we're here for the duration. And, it may be interesting after the election if Biden wins to see, whether that spirit of amity persists. But I don't think there's any serious person who doesn't think that the Bernie people have thrown themselves into this fully this time in a way that, may not have been as apparent in 2016.
I totally agree.
In terms of optimism, I think one thing is that it's actually good that it's not a Biden infrastructure. Like, I think the real problem in 2008 was you had Obama for America, you had Acorn, and all these things were demobilized by and abandoned by the Obama campaign. And the fact that you have like this very vibrant infrastructure that's separate from Biden is actually a great thing. Like, it's actually going to be a force in politics that the leaders of the party can't disband. so I think we have to take heart by that.
I would say one thing. I mean, these are state groups, which is powerful to be connected to your communities. Unless there's a huge stimulus that comes quickly, and I'm thinking Biden, cities and states are going to be hurting. And that's a reality that I think, I've become a mini expert on municipal bonds in the last week because the infrastructure program failed for a lot of reasons with Trump. But the cities and states could start issuing green bonds, municipal bonds, but it's going to be difficult. And I think these groups will find more power, but in a climate that is going to be difficult for their constituents, their people.
Yeah.
Just want to throw one more thing on as regards, we're talking about the people taking over parties. We should also emphasize that they're running. This is something incredible is happening in 2020. All over the battleground states, especially. There are people who are running for county clerk and register of deeds and judge and for DA. And all sorts of people who got engaged, often through the Bernie Sanders campaign. An example is in Kansas, where James Thompson ran for Congress 2 years ago. The first rally that Bernie Sanders and AOC did was for James Thompson. He didn't win that congressional race, but he's turned around this time. And he got on the ballot initially as a write-in candidate. Now he's on the November ballot running for a judgeship in Kansas and arguing that you need judges who understand Black Lives Matter. You need judges who understand racial justice issues. And he's got a chance of winning that judgeship. And so a ton of people who got engaged at the federal level have really gone back down into local races that matter a lot.
Okay, I'm going to take some questions from the audience because we've got some great questions. I'll throw them out, and whoever wants to, unless they're addressed to a specific person. And I'm going to start with a question from Jordan Weltman. I hope I pronounced that right, which is, he asks, can someone explain how, if we'll have 100 million votes by the end of the week, despite 5-hour lines, there can still be an additional 50+ million votes cast just on November 3rd. Are all of those people rural Republican voters?
No, I mean, it's because we have such hideous voter participation, for the most part, every 4 years. And we certainly did in 2016. 2008 was a bit of an aberration, but, there's plenty of room for, the electorate to double. It could double and still leave out a quarter of eligible voters. So, I think it's a real possibility that we're going to see numbers like that. And I worry, I have to say, I worry that, there are the silent, the shy Trump voter, the Trump voters that aren't being reached by polls. I think there will be some of those. I think in North Carolina, you're seeing, the two parties are pretty even in terms of early and absentee voting, which is a little bit surprising. So, it's not like, because of all this, Trump can't win. He can win, but I don't even think, obviously he probably will win the election day vote, but I think there'll be plenty of Democrats who have to choose to have to vote on election day too. I think it's going to be a stunning turnout.
Election experts are saying that you could surpass 150 million votes. For Jordan's question, that gets you right there to that 150 number. If there aren't probably going to be 50 million voting on election day, because remember, absentee ballots will still be returned and stuff. And there's a lot of early voting. But remember that in some states, it's still very hard to vote by mail. And so a lot of people, and this is Democrats and Republicans, will be voting on election day. The one other thing to remember is too, that there are a lot of people who just instinctually choose or by practice choose to vote on election day. This is actually very common in the African-American community, and there's a long history of it. And so what we should understand is that those people coming to the polls on election day, yeah, there may be, Trump has been pushing it and there may be a lot of that, but there's also going to be a lot of votes registered on election day for Democrats and for Joe Biden.
I'm afraid that we're cannibalizing our vote. Like I'm the worrier here. I feel like I'm an example, right? Like I always vote on election day except for this year. And so that's an election day vote that won't be there from me and my family, right? Like I maybe it's just 2016 PTSD, but we also had strong early vote numbers in 2016, and then election day happened and everything went to hell. So,
but not like this. We didn't have numbers like this.
True.
So we'll see.
Now, one more question about past nightmares, which is
past, great.
Do people have a sense of what's being done to prevent another Brooks Brothers rebellion? Which is slightly different than the militia.
Right.
I mean,
Roger Stone is still around.
Right. Yeah. Thinking about it.
I can speak to that a little bit, just insofar as that there is no way to prevent another Brooks Brothers rebellion. What to do is to be lawyered up and ready to go. And as we've already kind of discussed, there is a sense that the Biden campaign is much more ready for the legal challenges that start on November 4th and go through to December 14th, when the electors actually meet. Like they are ready for that now. Whether or not that bears fruit, given the conservative leanings of the Supreme Court, who knows? But they won't be like taken by surprise. I think that's what I remember most from and for those who don't know, Brooks Brothers is basically like all the people who descended upon Florida and screwed up the count and screwed up the recount, right? I don't know that prevents that from happening again. I just know that I just feel more confident the Democrats are ready to fight back when that happens again, if that makes sense.
And Elie, am I being too naive to think that John Roberts, the quote institutionalist he is, would consider stopping the count or something like that a crisis? Or
John Roberts is an enemy of voting. He has been.
No, it's true. He did article the Voting Rights.
He's the one that killed the Voting Rights Act. He's the one, as John already mentioned, he was one of the head lawyers on the Bush v. Gore team for Bush. Yeah. John Roberts does not like people voting, and especially does not like brown people voting.
He worked in Reagan's Justice Department looking for ways to oppose and also defang the Voting Rights Act in the 80s.
Absolutely. So I have never, even when RBG was alive, I never thought Roberts was on our side. I always thought we were going to lose at least some of these cases 5-4. The fact that we'll lose them 6-3 now is worse. The fact that even if Roberts flips, it doesn't matter.
There's no surprise in it.
But I never really had a lot of hope that Roberts would do the right thing. Now I will say that there is a level of wackadoodle that Roberts will not go for, and I think.
Elie, you keep using these technical terms.
I like it.
That's a legal term.
A wackadoodle.
I think when you see with the Brett Kavanaugh opinion, that was a concurrence. That wasn't the majority opinion.
And nobody signed on to that concurrence.
Right. Like there is a level of crazy that I do not think Roberts will go to. But if he can kind of suppress the vote and throw the election to the Republicans using normal means, he will absolutely do that.
Okay.
Right. By the way, that question came from M.R. Bagley. Thank you for that question. Pivoting slightly to perhaps a little potential for hope, Lila Walsh wants to know, can the changes that Trump made in the EPA and many other areas, the global and domestic gag rule on abortion, for example, political firing for civil service employees, can those be easily changed back if Biden takes over in January? And sort of to slightly add to that question, what are the rule changes? What are the executive order changes that you think ought to be at the top of a Democratic president or a new administration's wish list? And, anybody who wants to go first on that, please do.
The next president of the United States, if it is Joe Biden, should, prior to taking office, ask a staffer to collect all of Donald Trump's executive orders, and on January 20th, reverse them, right? And
Yeah.
orders, if there's something good in what Trump did, you can obviously re-up it. But there should be a blanket reversal of what Trump did. That's the whole point of an election, to undo what was done. Much of what Trump did was, frankly, by the nature of the appointments that he made,
Yeah.
put into office. And so for Lila, I would argue the most important thing to watch right now or in the aftermath of an election, if Biden is elected, is who the new administration is appointing to all of these positions. I've spent a lot of time watching communications law with the FCC, and just that shift in the FCC, literally you have protection of net neutrality as a fundamental issue that comes into play right there immediately. So we want to make sure that Biden's appointments are activists who are progressive. And that is not guaranteed. There is a very good danger that he will appoint corporatists or insiders to some of these positions. That's something that we should be on guard about immediately after Election Day, because appointments are policy, and most of what you're worried about can be dealt with, or not all of it, but much of it can be dealt with by appointing the right people and just giving them the charge to go forward and undo what the Trump administration did.
So
I co-sign
personnel is
everything.
policy. Personnel is policy.
Personnel is also policy, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, you make the right point, John, with the FCC. It's not just cabinet members, it's agencies.
Oh,
Agencies
ultra.
are critical.
And then
we had a good interview with Heather Boucher in the online the other day. I mean, I think you can already begin to see if it's Biden who will be in the economic team. But you're wonderfully moderate about we can't be assured there'll be activists. I mean,
Look,
really?
So I would just throw out there, and look, I co-sign everything that John just said and everything that Katrina just said, absolutely. But we're the nation. Let's talk expansively here. The third or fourth thing is he's got to undo all the executive orders, then he's got to do court packing. So the third thing he's got to do, like on day one, is redo the census.
Yeah.
The Republicans have mucked up the census. The Supreme Court has allowed them to stop the census. Yep. To my view, unconstitutionally. All the Constitution requires is that we have a count at least once every 10 years.
Can he do it, Elie? Can he say like bad data?
I think there are two completely rational legal arguments. One, the Congress is the thing that has the power to do the census. The Congress has delegated that authority to the Commerce Department.
Right.
So on January 4th, when Nancy Pelosi hopefully, let's assume the Democrats take back the House, continue holding the House. On January 4th, when Nancy Pelosi is sitting as a new Speaker of the House, she should take back that power to delegate it to the Commerce Department and take it back for Congress, right? And redo the census along those lines. The Congress should not accept the results of Wilbur Ross's Commerce Department census, right? If that doesn't work, if that feels a little bit too radical or whatever for certain people in this party, well, then the second legal option is that while the Constitution says that we have to have a census every 10 years, it doesn't say that has to be the only census that we have every 10 years. So then I think legally you could just say, okay, that was census A, now we're gonna do another census and just have another decennial census starting in 2021. It is critical that we count everybody. And
Absolutely.
we've seen for an entire year, Trump go out of his way to not count people. So that sets the apportionment, that sets how many congressional seats, that sets federal funding, that sets so many things. So we've got to go back and redo the census.
Not to mention that it would be a great employment program to do census.
Right. And on this point of on this point of appointments, right? It's why I care very deeply who Biden appoints as Commerce Secretary. And so when I hear suggestions that that's what he's thinking to do for a Republican, like, no. We need a Commerce Secretary that is going to redo the census immediately.
We have a couple of questions that I'm going to sort of run together. One from Ethan Scarl and one from Christine Jacobs and one from Timothy Heuvel. And they have to do with both the general question, which we were all up in arms about in 2016, but which we seem to think isn't going to be a problem this year, which is actual hacking the vote and, vote counts. And do we have a good audit system? Have states changed from the kind of computer ballots with no paper trails? So, we haven't been talking about that much. And, maybe if we wake up on November 4th and they announce that there's an enormous popular vote victory for Trump, we'll wonder, why didn't we pay attention to this? And then the second question is a little more, the second part of that is a little more local, but they ask about Pennsylvania. In states where they have to count every vote and the polls have to stay open until everyone in line votes, does that mean that they can't start counting the votes as long as there are people still in line? So either of those questions you want to speak to, but let's somebody at least speak to both of them because I think they're both great questions. And that was from Marianne Heitman.
Let me take the second part and then let somebody smarter than me take the first part. The second part is that Wisconsin or the United States has a completely ridiculous election system in which there are different rules for all the different states. So in some states you can start counting and in some states you can't. And because of those different rules, there's an incredible irregularity to it. In Wisconsin, for instance, you can absentee vote. You can pile up 1.5 million absentee votes. You can't start counting them as they come in, which would make sense, just feeding them into the machines and doing it.
Right.
You can only do it after the polls open on November 3rd. That creates a huge backlog. It's going to, I was talking, the mayor of Milwaukee the other day was saying that he can't see how they will get all the absentee votes counted and just put into the machines, dealt with until afternoon on Wednesday, the next day.
But there are some states where you can't start counting until after the polls close.
That you can't start counting the actual votes?
The absentees, the mail-in votes. Until after the polls close. And then that runs into the Kavanaugh proviso. That's the trap that our questioners are worried about. And I think it's a perfectly valid concern.
Yeah, there are some states are more progressive. North Carolina, for instance, is tabulating them every day, or they're feeding them in every day. They're processing them every day, and then they can tabulate them really quickly on election day. So, there are surprisingly progressive states in that way, but they should all be so.
But I do think that this kind of feeds into the first part of the question, which is, what about the hacking because we do not have one system, because we have a 50-state system, it actually makes us somewhat more resilient for hacking. You can't just hack one way. You have to hack specific states in specific ways. In some places you'd have to hack specific counties in specific ways, which builds in some redundancy to the system. But this is why I said, earlier, like if it is close, they will steal it. There are simply too many irons in the fire. Hacking is but one of them, right? There's the hacking, there's the vote counting, there's the Kavanaugh stuff. Like they have two. If they only have to flip a couple of points in one state to flip the whole election, then they will get away with it. They will steal it. The protection is that you win enough states so that there's just too much water for them to carry, right? So if they have to flip 5 states, I don't think they can get that done. If they have to flip 10 points in Pennsylvania, I don't think they can get that done. It's not Pennsylvania will not be 10 points, but so there's some magic number where, like, if it's 4%, they can't do it, but if it's 2.3%, they can't. Like, so the importance of having an overwhelming victory. This is why it is so important to have an overwhelming victory, because if you have an overwhelming victory, they won't be able to steal it. But if it is close, rest assured, they will take it.
But I just, I think it picks up on the resilience, but also the dysfunction of our voting system. Different countries meddle. I have a heretical view that if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, we wouldn't have spent 4 years on Russiagate. That's a different issue. I think Trump is a toxic product of our own pathologies, this country's pathologies. And I think we've depleted some of our resilience by so much being blamed on Russia putting Trump in the White House. And it'll be interesting to see when Biden wins. Someone.
Oh, you're making me nervous.
I know, but how, what happened was Russiagate became a domestic issue. It wasn't about Russia. It was Putin, Trump, Trump, Putin, and odious both in a way. But someone said about Biden, this goes very quickly to what we are going to see. He's a throwbacky kind of guy on foreign policy. And he's a traditional, and you'll see very traditional appointments. You may well see John Brennan, Clapper, and those forces in this administration. And I think we need to fight to avert a new Cold War with China, which they're gearing up for. And our correspondent Michael Clare is issuing an open letter. Let's have a debate and a dialogue before we enter a new Cold War, because we need all the resources at home at this moment, considering we're going through this pandemic. We're going through what we see should redefine security and not lead to more nukes and more spending on military budgets.
Well,
but that's my view of.
Well, if we're going to get ahead of ourselves,
not denying there was hacking. Let us remember, I think that what was hacked was real about Bernie Sanders and the party divisions and John Podesta's risotto recipe.
Well, if we're going to get ahead of ourselves and imagine, what are going to be the challenges and rewards of an incoming administration, one question we have, I'm trying to figure out who it was from. It was an excellent question, which is about the Electoral College. Yes, this is from Ray Healy. He wants to know, since Elie, you said you slipped court packing in there as number 2, but you didn't dwell on it on this panel. Although, our readers will know, faithful readers will know that we have not let up the fight for a second. But on the question of abolishing the Electoral College, what kind of support is there for that in Congress, really? And can we expect any real movement on that in the early days?
I can't see how to do it without a constitutional amendment. I really can't. I love the idea of each of these individual states kind of entering a compact to say that they will throw their electoral college votes to the popular vote winner nationally. I like that as an idea to get around the Constitution, but until you get 270 electoral college voting states to agree to do that, it's still not a solution. So I don't see a lot of chance of overturning of abolishing the Electoral College without a constitutional amendment, and that requires me to have 36 states or so state legislatures in favor of abolishing the Electoral College, and right now tops I got 20. So I think that the Electoral College is unfortunately a thing that is here to stick with us for a while. That said, in the world of a large Biden victory, with a large mandate for change, of a large of a Supreme Court expansion plan, of voting rights protection is the way to eventually abolish the Electoral College. And it's a little bit of a bank shot, it's a little bit of calling glass, but if you have voting rights protections, if more people vote, well, then more people take over their state legislatures. And if more people take over their state legislatures, well, then that gives you the 30 odd states that you're going to need to eventually pass the constitutional amendment. So there's a way to do it. But it starts with securing voting rights, and you can't secure voting rights without first expanding the court.
Yeah, I think expanding the court and getting rid of the filibuster are going to be the top legislative priorities, and they're already, a pretty heavy lift. Although, I've been impressed by the number of moderates who say we've got to consider it. So it's definitely not the radical. These are definitely not the radical ideas that they once were depicted as, but they're not going to be easy either. So.
And I take hope that there's a movement behind the filibuster.
Yes.
Change. I mean, that's going to be important, that it's outside pressure. And I think Warren and Merkley in the Senate are leading. And then there's Schumer. I won't mention those who've talked to Schumer, but, he's no radical. Don't need to tell you, but he's terrified by AOC. Yep. And so he's moving or speaking in ways we haven't heard.
Well, and it was interesting to see, AOC and the whole squad, as soon as Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed, their tweets were expand the court.
That's right.
So,
I saw that.
Well, I think you deserve credit for it, Elie, but I think they're with the program, and I think that's significant.
But so much of this comes down to Biden. It is true that advocacy is going to matter, but the thing I worry about most is that Joe Biden really is an institutionalist. He's a man of the Senate, not of his vice presidency and not of everything that's come since then. And there is a terrible, terrible danger right up front that Joe Biden launches, basically what will go down very well in the media, right? Which is a new era of good feeling. We're all reconciling in that, and that he will focus primarily on a good stimulus package. That's vital. A good stimulus package is heart and soul necessary at this point. But if Biden does what previous Democratic presidents have done, which is to put the reforms off to the side, doesn't take the action immediately, those things will not happen. And I want to emphasize, they won't happen. And we are still waiting for card check from Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter didn't do it. Bill Clinton didn't do it. Barack Obama didn't do it. We didn't get it. And so this simple step that could be taken to make it dramatically easier to organize trade unions and collectively bargain hasn't happened. If you can't get that, when you're talking about things like expanding the court, when you're talking about all these other things, it becomes tremendously difficult. So pressure has to focus on Biden.
Well, that's one reason, John, just to buttonhole that. It's one reason that if you hear me talk or if you read what I've written in The Nation about court expansion, I always try to put it in the language of protecting the Senate, of court expansion as a way to depoliticize the Senate confirmation process, and actually thinking of court expansion as a way to fix the Senate. The way that I slate it that way is not just because I believe it, but because I also believe that it is the best way to sell it to senators and to especially people like Joe Biden who believe that the Senate as an institution is the thing that's important. Now, I am no institutionalist, but if you can explain it to these people about how court expansion saves their precious little institutions, I think it has more of a chance of going forward.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, all this legislation, by the way, is teed up in the House. I mean, they have good legislation. So if you can move it through the Senate, that depends on the filibuster reform.
Well, so
you may see a lot of House and Senate members get wobbly with the prospect of reality. They've talked. Anyway.
I'm gonna roll in two questions again, and these may be near the end of our questions from the audience. Deborah Stiles asks, if we're fortunate enough to have a blue wave, what's the best strategy for bringing the country back together? And I think that is a question that deserves addressing on its own. But then there's, if you like, a radical twist to that question, which is, what are the changes that we need to make and this is inspired by a question from John Hayworth, to tilt the playing field in a progressive direction, to change the structure of our politics. He mentions, for example, DC statehood being way ahead of abolishing the Electoral College, not just in terms of practicality, but in terms of its immediate impact on the balance of power. So, and I'm going to direct this to Jeet first. What are the balance of power structural changes that can be made? And, also Deborah Stiles' question, if you want to address that as well, but others can address it later. What is the, is it possible to bring the country back together? And if so, what are the programmatic ways to do that?
Yeah, I think, I'm glad that the statehood question was brought up, because I actually think for me, that has priority over everything else. And it's not just a matter of power, but also of justice. That I don't think, you can have so many people in DC and, frankly, Puerto Rico that are unrepresented. But it will also shift the balance of power. And I think that's what you kind of, in terms of bringing the country together, I don't know if that's possible. I think that what you need is for the Democrats to govern, and they have to think about how they can govern and how they can govern in a way that will give them permanent victories. And the Senate expansion, to me, along with filibuster, those two reforms, if you can somehow get Biden on board. And one thing I'll say with Biden, I agree with John, he's an institutionalist, but he's also a party man, much more so than Obama was. And if the center of the Democratic Party, if people like Schumer are on board, and I think if people are, the third factor in terms of movement is primaries. If people like Schumer are afraid of being primaried, they will move in a more activist direction, and I think that will move Biden himself. So for me, bringing the country back together, I don't know if that, I think for me, that's not the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to govern, is to make changes, and then you'll see if people come together. So,
yeah, I would say I agree with that. I remember that Obama won, I forget, 51%. But right before election day, his approval rating was 69%. So you had all these people who didn't vote for him, but for whatever reason, swept up, perhaps in our first Black president, good feeling, proud that the country did that, even though they didn't do it personally, learning more about him. I think he takes off, he will take office with somewhat expanded goodwill, as well as the QAnon people and all that noise that's not going to go away. But, like Jeet, I think the most important way to ultimately heal the country is to get things done. And when people see that he can govern, and when people see, that there is a quick stimulus package, and that there's a really different emphasis on who is centered, and that includes Black people, and that includes criminal justice reform, to be honest. I think that's the most important thing we can do. And I think that we all know that Obama squandered some of that goodwill by banking on the goodwill of Senate Republicans, which that was not the same thing. They were not among the 69% who approved of him. I think Biden, despite some of his rhetorical nods, I think he's coming in wiser than he was 6 months ago. So I have some optimism, but it only gets done if they govern.
I think it's the moment. I think it's the moment. It's not Biden, the man. I think you're looking at the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. He clearly is moved by this idea, though, of a New Deal moment. He's down in Warm Springs, Georgia yesterday. The idea of a governing moment has to be rooted, it seems to me, in what you said, Joan. I think that you get things done. Government can show it works on behalf of people. And so jobs, justice. And I think that will be critical. We've seen the arguments over the size. Remember the size of the stimulus under Obama. Biden needs to go big, but needs to continue in the sense of seizing a governing moment. And I do think the moment will make him. Roosevelt, not to get too drawn into parallels, was a budget deficit busting governor. Mm-hmm. The last thing I'd say about level the playing field, we haven't talked about it, what Bernie Sanders did, and AOC and a few others who are capable of it, of untethering the Democratic Party from money, big money. I think it, hasn't been brought up enough in this election, because you know, I said to my sister the other day, I love her, she's giving money to Biden. I said, you know, people don't give to him because he's cute. You know, I mean, they're given because, you know, there's a transactional level of politics, which we also need to not lose sight of so that all kinds of people can run. And they are, but it's still really expensive, some of these races.
Can I just say, I mean, I don't want to be the fly in the punch, but like, screw healing.
I'm not healing.
These people have kidnapped children and locked them in cages, right? These people have sat idly by while over 200,000 Americans have died because they thought the pandemic would stay in blue states.
And we need justice.
Healing, I need accountability. I need justice. I need truth, and I need potentially reconciliation, but only after truth and justice. And Biden's does not give me a lot of hope that he will do that. But I tell you what, Harris does. Like she and Warren, I thought, were the two people in the primary that were most direct about prosecuting the case against the Trump administration and holding these people accountable for what they did. Bill Barr, Attorney General Bill Barr, if he's still alive, turned tear gas on peaceful protesters so Trump could take a photo with an upside down Bible. These people have to be brought to account, and we cannot move forward. We cannot do the Obama thing of looking forward and not backwards. We must have an accounting for what happened before we can move forward.
Agreed.
I'll just say one point on that, though. I think one good thing is it's not just going to come from a federal level. One great thing about Trump is he's committed a lot of crimes at a state level. and so
at every level.
International.
So I
Chicago.
think there's a lot of different places through which justice can be achieved, not just the Attorney General.
So I would just say one final thing, and that is, don't lose sight of the fact that you need to govern in big ways. If you are elected president and you defeat an incumbent, the people are saying they want something different. So the Biden administration should move very rapidly on a $4 trillion stimulus. It should be huge. It should have a lot of policy within it, and it should be driven very fast so that things happen immediately. At the same time, there needs to be a parallel accountability effort, as Elie and other people have spoken about. But the other thing to do is to keep reminding the Democrats that when they don't go big, when they don't kind of dominate the stage, when they take power, they run the risk of having happen to them exactly what happened to Jimmy Carter, disempowered in the 78 midterm elections, to Bill Clinton, disempowered in the 94 midterm elections, and to Barack Obama, disempowered in the 2010. So you don't have moral argument. What ought to be done is to make a practical political argument. Govern in huge ways, hold people to account, dominate the stage, reward your friends and punish your enemies, because that is the way that politics works. Don't go for healing.
I'm gonna stop you, John. I'll come back to you, I promise, because this is going to be our lightning round of hope. In a minute or less, and I'm going to start with Joan and work my way clockwise around my screen. So that means Joan, Jeet, Katrina, Elie, and John. What is it that you are hoping to see in the next week? So not your hopes for your life, not your hopes for America, your hopes for between now and the day after Election Day. And Joan, go first, and please keep it fair, to a minute if you can.
Sure. I mean, continued amazing turnout, number one. And then I don't want to set myself or others up for the little smidge of disappointment we felt in 2018 when Stacey Abrams lost in Georgia and Beto O'Rourke lost in Texas. So I don't want to go too far with this, but I would really love to see, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff win in Georgia. I would love to see Biden win in Georgia, and I would love to see Texas turn blue. And it just may be too much to ask, but those things are shimmering out there. And if you ask me what I want, John.
Okay, Jeet.
Okay, so turnout. Let's be specific. 150 million, 155 million, 165 million. You could get the highest turnout per capita since 1908. So since before women could vote, since before Jim Crow. And you'll have a totally different electorate than ever before. Some of that is a little bit scary. You're going to get, Trump will get some of the non-college whites, rurals that he didn't, that haven't come out even before. But in general, it's going to be an electorate that looks more like America than we've ever seen before. And that's going to be a tidal wave.
Okay.
I'd like to see a great new coalition arise and give us a blue sweep on Tuesday by midnight with Florida leading the way. I don't think many people can take this stress. I'd like to see Backbone to Fight moving to Tuesday and moving beyond.
Personally, I hope that somebody puts me on Biden's freaking court expansion commission instead of Harvard law professors like Noah Feldman. Like, that's my personal hope. But for the country, I need these senators to lose. I need Lindsey Graham to lose. I need Joni Ernst. I need there to be punishment for what the Republican Senate has done. Because if there's not electoral punishment for what they've done, then even if Trump loses, not only is John right that Biden will start as a lame duck, that it also will reaffirm the Republican commitment to Trumpism. But if these people lose, especially Lindsey Graham, somehow, some way loses, that will show them that hugging Trump and Trumpism too closely can have consequences. So I really hope these senators take it on the nose. Or the chin, sorry.
Chin is good. Nose or chin. My hope is a very simple one. I hope Mike Espy gets elected to the U.S. Senate from Mississippi. Because the fact of the matter is, if Mike Espy can win that seat, which is a tall climb, I understand it, but it's actually made it a competitive race. If he can win that seat in Mississippi, they take the Senate. And the bottom line is this: when I look at next Tuesday, I'm very interested in the presidential race, but I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'll take the Senate first and foremost. Give me a Democratic-controlled, progressive-leaning Senate. And the fact of the matter is, you can change a lot of stuff. If you do not have it, you cannot function. So I'm looking at Mike Espy. I'm looking at Steve Bullock up in Montana. I'm looking at a host of other candidates. And at the end of the day, my number one passion is Reverend Raphael Warnock in Georgia. I am hoping that he comes through top on that
Oversight.
On the runoff.
Just took the seat.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John Nichols, Joan Walsh, Jeet Heer, Elie Mystalwill, Katrina vanden Heuvel. Thank you very much to our audience for fantastic questions. They were wonderful. Thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to turn over now to the nation's associate publisher, Sarah Burke. But it's been a joy to be with you all here, and we will be back in some form or another after the election. So, if you like this, tell your friends and come back for more. Sarah, it's all yours.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As a Pennsylvania voter, this has helped ease a little bit of my pre-election anxiety. Not much, but a little bit. And so if you haven't registered for our big post-election event, which is the Nation Festival, we hope you will do so. We just released the full festival schedule, so it is out now. You can see the entire thing by going to thenation.com/nationfestival. We'll drop that link in the chat so you can head over and check it out. We're also really thrilled to announce that Reverend William Barber was just added to the lineup. So please check out the Nation Festival if you haven't already. We really hope that you will buy tickets, and I really hope I get to see you there.